The first thing I saw was a stranger carrying a rifle through my woods. The second thing I saw was the contract in his pocket. The third thing I realized was that somebody had sold him permission to hunt land they didn't own. Now, if you spend your whole life in the country, you know there's certain things that get your attention real fast. A strange truck behind your gate is one of them. A strange truck behind your gate during deer season is another level entirely. My name is Wyatt Turner, and this happened outside a little town called Briar Ridge, Arkansas, about 2 years ago. I've got 71 acres of hardwood timber that sits between a creek and a stretch of old cattle land. Nothing fancy. No lodge, no cabins, no fancy signs with logos on them. Just woods. The kind of woods that smell like wet leaves after rain and hold enough memories to make a grown man stop talking for a minute. My grandfather bought that place in 1958. My dad taught me to hunt there. And after both of them were gone, I inherited it. The thing about family land is people who don't come from it often don't understand it. They see acreage. You see stories. They see dollar signs. You remember where your father showed you your first deer track. That's the difference. Every spring I walk every boundary line myself. I carry purple paint and a GPS. The corner pins have been there longer than most of the people living around us. Survey records filed. Tax maps updated. Everything clean. I've never leased hunting rights. Never wanted to. A couple buddies hunt with me sometimes. My nephew comes out every season. That's about it. The woods stay quiet. That's how I like them. Now, my neighbor on the south side was a guy named Cole Bennett. At least that's what I'll call him. Cole wasn't a bad neighbor at first. Matter of fact, when he moved in, I helped him unload fencing materials. Pulled his side-by-side out of a mud hole one spring. Loaned him a chainsaw after an ice storm. But Cole had a different way of looking at land. To him, everything was a business opportunity. Every conversation somehow circled back to money. You know what you can make leasing those woods? He'd ask. I'd laugh and tell him the same thing every time. Probably less than they're worth to me. He never understood that answer. You could tell. A few years after moving in, he started running a hunting service. Built a website. Bought trail cameras. Started bringing in clients from Texas, Arizona, Florida. Folks looking for big southern bucks and weekend adventure stories. Good for him. Wasn't my business. At least that's what I thought. Then came that Friday afternoon. I was driving home from town after picking up supplies for a fence repair. The sun was dropping low, turning everything gold. It should have been one of those peaceful drives where you roll the window down and enjoy the quiet. Instead, I turned the corner near my gate and saw two pickups parked inside my property. Not beside the road. Not near the entrance. Inside. At first I figured maybe somebody had broken down. Maybe somebody got lost. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was a sign attached to my fence post. A brand new laminated sign. And it wasn't mine. I stopped the truck. Got out. Walked closer. Across the top was a logo I recognized immediately. Bennett Ridge Outfitters. Cole's business. I just stood there staring at it. For a second my brain actually tried convincing me there had to be an explanation. Maybe somebody moved it. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe I was misunderstanding something. Then I heard voices down near the creek. Men talking, laughing, moving through my timber like they belonged there. That's when I started walking. Slow, steady, trying very hard not to let my temper get ahead of me. Because one thing my father taught me was this. The angriest man usually loses first. And as I got closer, I saw two hunters in blaze orange stepping through a patch of white oak trees. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like they had every reason in the world to be standing exactly where they were. What I didn't know yet was that both of those men had paid thousands of dollars for access to my land. And before that evening was over, I was going to discover my neighbor had built an entire business plan around property that belonged to somebody else. And that was only the beginning. I called out before they noticed me. Afternoon, gentlemen. Both men turned around. The older one looked to be in his late 40s. The younger guy was probably early 30s. Nice equipment. Expensive rifles. Clean boots that hadn't seen much Arkansas mud. Neither one looked like trouble. Honestly, they looked like customers. The older man smiled. Afternoon. I nodded toward the woods around us. You boys mind telling me whose property you think you're standing on? The smile disappeared. Not completely, just enough. They exchanged a glance. The younger hunter reached into his vest pocket. We're hunting through Bennett Ridge Outfitters. Then he pulled out a folded packet. The second I saw it, something in my chest sank. Because people don't carry paperwork unless somebody told them paperwork mattered. He handed it over. There it was. Professional letterhead. Liability waivers. Access agreement. Maps. Égalité en zone. And right there at the bottom, Corbinete signature. I unfolded the map, then unfolded it again, and that's when I felt my jaw tighten. Every major landmark on my property was highlighted. My creek crossing, my North Ridge, my white oak stand, even the old logging trail my grandfather had cut decades earlier. It was all there, every bit of it. The older hunter must have seen my expression. Something wrong? I looked up. How much did y'all pay for this? The younger guy hesitated, then shrugged. 3,000 each. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes when something is unbelievable, your brain doesn't know what else to do. $3,000. Piranter. For access to land Cole didn't own. I handed the packet back. This property belongs to me. Silence. The younger hunter blinked. What? I pointed toward the creek. Everything from here to that ridge belongs to me. They stared at me, then stared at each other, then back at the map. The older hunter slowly shook his head. No, we checked the listing. I believe you. He said he expanded acreage this year. I believe that too. He had maps. I know. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The whole situation seemed to collapse around them in real time. You could literally see it happening. The excitement, the anticipation, the 9-hour drive, the hotel rooms, the money, every bit of it turning into confusion. Finally, the older man sighed. So we're trespassing? I shook my head. Not intentionally. Then I pointed toward the road. But you need to leave. To their credit, they didn't argue. Didn't get defensive. Didn't try pulling the customer card. They packed up and headed back toward their trucks. Halfway there, the younger hunter stopped. You should probably know something. I looked at him. There were supposed to be 3 groups this weekend. My stomach dropped. What do you mean 3 groups? He said this was one of several access zones. Then he climbed into his truck. A few moments later, both vehicles disappeared down the gravel road, leaving me alone with that sign still hanging on my fence. The woods suddenly felt different, like somebody had walked into my house and rearranged the furniture while I was gone. I pulled the sign down myself, then sat in my truck for almost 20 minutes, thinking, trying to decide what came next. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about situations like this. The first instinct is confrontation. You want answers. You want accountability. You want to march down there and demand explanations. But another voice kept whispering in the back of my mind. If he's doing this openly, this probably isn't the first time. That thought changed everything. The next morning I drove straight into town. Not to Cole's house. To the regional wildlife office. That's where I met Deputy Wildlife Officer Grant Holloway. Grant was one of those men who never seemed rushed. Calm voice. Sharp eyes. The kind of person who could listen to a 5-minute story and somehow figure out which 10 seconds actually mattered. I laid the contract on his desk. He read every page. Didn't interrupt once. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. You ever authorize this? No. You ever lease hunting rights to him? No. You have surveys? I slid the folder across the desk. Grant opened it, studied the maps, studied the deeds, then looked back at me. What you've got here may be more than simple trespassing. That got my attention. What do you mean? He tapped the contract. If he's collecting money for access to wildlife resources on property he doesn't control, that's potentially a regulatory violation. I sat there quietly. Grant continued, and every client directed onto unauthorized property can count separately. Now his attention had mine completely. He closed the folder. Let's go take a look. An hour later, we were walking my eastern boundary. Grant carried a GPS unit and survey documents. I carried 40 years of familiarity. Every corner marker was exactly where it should be. Every purple paint mark was visible. Every boundary line was obvious. The deeper we went, the worse it looked for Cole. Because we didn't just find one sign. We found 6. 6 separate Bennett Ridge signs attached to trees and fence posts inside my property. Some of them nearly a quarter mile from his actual boundary. Grant photographed everything, measured coordinates, took notes, never said much, but I could tell he wasn't impressed. Then we reached the creek. The same creek Cole had apparently convinced himself was the property line. Grant crouched near an old survey pin, brushed away leaves, and uncovered the concrete marker. Still intact, still visible, still exactly where it had been for decades. He checked the coordinates, compared them to the survey, then looked up at me. Well, what? He stood. There's no confusion here. That's when I knew. Whatever story Cole had been telling himself wasn't going to survive actual measurements. We finished documenting everything and headed toward his place. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Part of me expected excuses. Part of me expected anger. What I didn't expect was how quickly the cracks would start showing. Cole was standing outside his workshop when we pulled in. The second he saw the wildlife truck, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of reaction people have when they already know why you're there. Grant stepped out first. Morning. Cole nodded. Morning. Then his eyes landed on me, and suddenly nobody was smiling anymore. Grant held up the contract. We have some questions regarding commercial hunting access. Cole's face stayed calm, but I noticed something. His jaw tightened, just slightly. The way it does when somebody realizes a conversation isn't going to go the way they planned. And standing there beside that state vehicle, watching him calculate his next answer, I had a feeling this entire situation was about to become a whole lot bigger than either of us expected. Grant didn't waste any time. He held the contract up and looked directly at Cole. Did you sell hunting access that included acreage beyond your deeded property? For a second, Cole tried to look confused. The problem was he wasn't very good at it. What exactly are we talking about? He asked. Grant handed him the map. The highlighted areas. Cole looked down, then back up. The creek has always been treated as the boundary. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because hearing him say it out loud somehow made it sound even weaker. Grant folded his arms. By whom? Cole hesitated. That hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it told the entire story. People around here. Grant nodded slowly. The survey says otherwise. Cole shifted his weight. The realtor packet I got years ago showed it differently. The recorded survey doesn't. Another pause, the kind that grows heavier every second. Finally, Grant asked the question that mattered most. Did you collect money based on acreage you did not legally control? Cole looked from Grant to me, then back again. And for the first time since we'd arrived, he looked nervous. Yes, just one word, but it landed like a hammer. Because the moment he said it, every possible misunderstanding disappeared. No confusión, no accident, no communication issue. He had sold something he didn't own. Grant took a few notes, then explained what would happen next. The violations, the investigation, the permit review, the possible penalties. With every sentence, Cole's face seemed to lose a little more color. By the time we left, he looked like a man watching a storm roll in after realizing he forgot to close every window in the house. The official notices arrived the following week. 3 separate client groups had been booked. 3 separate violations related to unauthorized commercialization. Additional violations tied to facilitating access onto property outside his legal control. The fines added up quickly. But the money wasn't the real problem. The real problem was his outfitter permit. Without that permit, his business basically stopped breathing. Prime deer season was already underway. Clients started canceling. Refund requests started showing up. Word spread faster than either of us expected. Small towns work like that. People don't need newspapers. They have coffee shops, feed stores, church parking lots. Within days, everybody knew some version of the story. Most versions weren't entirely accurate, but they were close enough. A few evenings later, just after sunset, I heard tires crunching up my driveway. I looked through the kitchen window and immediately recognized the truck. Cole. He sat inside for nearly a minute before getting out. That alone told me something. The old Cole would have walked straight to the door. This version looked like a man rehearsing a difficult conversation. I stepped onto the porch before he could knock. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sky was turning orange behind the trees. The air carried that cold autumn smell that always reminds me deer season is almost over. Finally, he sighed. I screwed up. No excuses. No arguments. Just that. I leaned against the porch rail. Yeah. He stared out toward the woods. I thought it wasn't a big deal. There it was. The truth. Not greed. Not exactly. Something more dangerous. Rationalization. The ability to convince yourself that wrong isn't really wrong because you've explained it enough times in your own head. I figured you weren't using most of it anyway. I nodded slowly. You know what's funny? What? You just explained the entire problem. He looked at me, confused. I pointed toward the tree line. You see in used acreage. I see family. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything we'd said before. Because for the first time, I think he understood the difference. That creek wasn't valuable because it could generate revenue. It was valuable because my father taught me to fish there. The ridge wasn't important because somebody might shoot a trophy buck there. It was important because my grandfather walked those trails before I was born. There are some things you can't measure in dollars. And if you spend enough time measuring everything in dollars, eventually you stop seeing what those things actually are. Cole rubbed the back of his neck. I'll take the signs down. You will. I'll refund everyone. You should. I already changed the website. I nodded. Then he asked the question he'd probably been driving over there to ask. You gonna keep pushing this? I thought about it for a second, then shook my head. I already got what I wanted. He looked surprised. You did? Yeah. What? My land back. That answer seemed to hit him harder than any fine. Because fines are numbers. This wasn't. This was principle. A few days later, I watched him remove the last of the signs. One by one. Every logo. Every marker. Every reminder. By winter, everything looked normal again. The woods returned to being woods. The creek kept flowing. The deer kept moving through the timber without caring about contracts or lawsuits or human ego. Life has a way of continuing. A month later, I ran into Cole at the feed store. The first time we'd seen each other since the porch conversation. He looked tired, but different. Maybe humbled. Maybe just older. He nodded. Permit got reinstated. That's good. Probationary status. I shrugged. Could have been worse. He laughed quietly. Trust me. I know. For a few moments we stood there between stacks of feed bags and sea pallets. Then he looked at me. You think I'm a crook? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it honestly, then answered honestly. No. His eyebrows lifted. No. I shook my head. I think you told yourself a story long enough that you started believing it. He stared at the floor for a moment, then nodded. Yeah. Maybe that was the closest thing to closure either of us was going to get. These days we still wave when we pass each other on the road. Not friends. Not enemies. Just two men who learned an expensive lesson from the same piece of land. Every spring, I still walk those property lines. I still check the corner markers. I still carry purple paint. And every time I pass that creek, I think about how differently this story could have ended. If I'd shown up angry. If I'd chosen confrontation instead of documentation. If pride had gotten ahead of common sense. Out here, land disputes have a way of turning ugly fast. Instead, this one ended with paperwork, consequences, and a reminder that boundaries only matter when people respect them. Now I'm curious what you think. If you came home and found strangers hunting on your family's property, carrying contracts signed by your neighbor, what would you have done? Would you have knocked on his door first? Would you have called the authorities immediately? Did Cole deserve what happened? Or do you think the penalties went too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because stories like this always split people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with property disputes, bad neighbors, hunting lease conflicts, or somebody treating your land like it belonged to them, share your story too. I'd love to hear where you draw the line between being neighborly and standing your ground.